Hello, I am Umbrenero, and welcome back to Umbrenero's Life. Today's video is Art Piece for My Husband, Part 3. So, we have made it to the final part of this mini-series. Here is where the details finally got finished, and I did all of the outlines for all of the shapes in this painting. So I started off on the blue section. I had to put in an X, and since my husband plays video games, you can probably figure out what this painting kind of was inspired by. But I'll leave that to you to figure it out. So I did the X first, went over, did the square next. Yes, my camera freaked out a couple of times because it didn't like how it was set up and all of that, but it happens. So this video, if I did not shorten the clips like I did, would have been almost 5 hours long of just doing the detail work. And let me say, this took a while and felt very painful by the end of it. So I'm glad when it was finished. So after the square, I moved on to the green triangle. And this is where those mid colors that I did back in the first video finally got to shine. They were the colors for the symbols I was going to use all along, and they helped with the backgrounds. That's where having them be darker worked out very well for me. And when I say darker, I mean the backgrounds being darker with that lighter color, but not overly light. It helped in the long run. But this is where these mid colors got to really shine. The last one is the reddish circle. You should be able to figure out by now what inspired this painting. So, once those were all done, next was the fun part of putting the outlining on every single thing in this painting. So, my thought was the closer to the center it was, the more of the lighter, almost white, because there was some silver mixed in. But the closer to the center, the more light color would be on the shape. So the lighter colored ones were the easiest to do with the light color because, hey, they're the lightest one. So I started by tackling the main center shape and then going through around all of the ones that were along the red section. Because to me it just made sense at the time, and I was just focused on working on this. So once all of the white light gray was done, it was then time to pull out the actual gray paint. So my mid of my light to dark for my neutral colors. And those were to kind of give that little bit of a shadow along each of the shapes. And I try to put them so they were farther from the center to kind of help fade it to the darkness. Then, I didn't continue on with the red side. I switched over to the purpley pink side and actually started doing the light color, my whitish gray, around the side of the square, the side that was closest to the center, and around the things in the pinkish purple section. Because by doing this next, I ended up finishing all of the shapes that were in the green and blue at the same time. So it just made sense to me to do all of the light color first, get done with it, then I didn't have to deal with it later on. But then I started to do more outlining of the main shapes because I wanted to get them done and taken care of, so I was done with my lighter color. So I did the triangle, circle, and went and did the X. You can see here that it's starting to take shape, and the outlining did help keep the colors from blending together where there were the few little mistakes in the background from early on. But then I finally broke out the darkest of my neutral colors that I had to start doing that outlining on the rest of the shapes. So we did the X, and then I went and started doing all of the outlining along the edge of the blue section because I knew that would take the take the longest, because I was also doing this on the edge of my canvases. But I got it done pretty timely. Then here you can see me doing that a little bit more for the last little bit of the blue section going into the purple. So I kind of went from the lightest to the darkest because I felt having all of that done first, then coming in doing the mid-tone would make it a lot easier, so that way I knew where the mid-tone was going, because I had no plan going into this part. This was all purely by instinct on what I thought would look good when I was doing this. So I kept going. The little shapes that were closer towards the center got a little bit less than some of the others of this dark color, but they still got enough. Luckily, with my work table, I can bounce around between both sides of it, so I didn't have to worry about having to reach all the way across the whole time when it came to doing my painting here or any of this. Then I did the dark outlining of the purpley pink shape of the square. Here is where I started realizing that keeping my paint open for as long as I was getting to be a pain. So I was constantly having to put the lid back on my paint after I dipped and going back and forth. And I think that's what ended up making this take about 5 hours. I noticed it with the light color, but it didn't really faze me much. So I just kept going and went with the flow. So here, I kept doing what I've been doing, going with the flow. And on the small areas where there was a couple shapes that ended up getting a little wonky looking, I used the dark paint to kind of cover up the little mistakes that there were. And, you know, looking at it now, you can barely tell those mistakes were even there. So I got most of the way through the green section, then I went and did the dark around the top of the triangle. And because I was smart and cleaned off my work table, I was able to just move my 3 canvases around, so that way I didn't have to worry about fully repositioning them. And when I needed to move them, I could just slide them. But then I finally got to the reddish area, and it was a lot. It really was a lot. This is the biggest art piece that I have done so far, and I want to do a couple other art pieces, so we'll see how those come. If I'm doing them this year, I'm not sure. They might end up being next year projects, but we'll see. But then I finished the dark ring on the circle, and I went and finished the dark around the blue areas because I realized I forgot a whole portion of it and just did it with the red area. Another thing with the outlining of the shapes, it was to kind of give a shadow effect to the canvases of this art, and it was to cover up the pencil marks that were still there after painting in all of these little shapes. At one point, I did notice that the size of the brush I was using did matter quite a bit. So that's why in this last little bit, you've seen me using a brush with a pure blue handle, because that was my narrowest brush, and it did a lot better than the brush that is being used in this clip. So here, I was putting in that mid-tone gray because it was that medium neutral color, and I figured in the center of the symbols, having that be the color would work because, you know, it does help it stand out from its background. But then I had to put that color in all the spots where the dark gray and the light gray were not. So this is another area where this took a bit. But this was, I think, my second thinnest or third thinnest brush. And that's why I was bouncing between this and the one I was using a while ago here. And they worked very well because when I got tired of one, I just swapped to the other. And sometimes you just need to change what you're using. But here, I went through, got all of this outlining, edging done. And it turned out pretty well, because there were a couple little spots where this was needed to help clean up the shape of some of these little shattered pieces around the canvas. But then I finished off the inner border of the square with the gray, and it just made sense. But then as I got closer to the center, the gray became the lighter of, well, not lighter, the darker of the colors when it was with the lighter. I did enjoy the bit of difference that it created between the little shapes and the big symbols between the background color, because it helped make them stand out and not just disappear into the background. And that was kind of the biggest thing I wanted, is I wanted these to be able to be seen, to be noticed, and all of that. So we're finally on to the last side. And this was the home stretch, truly. Just going through, filling in the medium gray here. I knew I was getting closer and closer to being done with this. Then there would be only one step left after it was done drying. But first I had to do all of the gray. So I got halfway through, decided let's do the circle, be done with that, and then wrap up the rest of this. So once I was completely done with all of this, I had ended up sealing it, and it took it a couple days to finish drying, but I am very happy with how it turned out. And you will see here in just a little bit how it actually looks hung up on the wall in my husband's office. So stay tuned to see that little clip here at the very end. And thank you for watching, and until next time, I am Umbrenero. Bye!